As global attention turns to the risks of artificial intelligence, China will play a pivotal role in setting standards for this emerging technology. I'm Shannon Tiezzi, the editor-in-chief at the Diplomat magazine, and today I'll be talking with Kendra Schaefer, the head of tech policy research at Trivium China, about China's approach to AI governance.
Hi, great to be here.
Thanks for joining us, Kendra. On November 1st and 2nd, Britain hosted the AI Safety Summit to discuss the risk posed by artificial intelligence and how to address those risks through international action. Now, China took part in that summit, which was somewhat controversial within the UK. Kendra, how would you evaluate China's participation at the AI Safety Summit?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the back and forth on whether or not China should be invited was centered around the, question of should only like-minded, democracies, Western democracies specifically, be invited to discuss the future of AI and AI safety. But ultimately, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, I think, rightly came to the conclusion, I think his quote was, there can be no serious strategy for AI without at least trying to engage all of the world's AI powers. And I think a couple of members of his cabinet said something to the effect of, look, China's not going away. And I think that they're correct in that assessment. Personally, China is one of the world's leading AI powers at this point. And as I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment, they have made considerable strides on AI policy domestically and have also been involved in, formulating some international AI ethics rules, et cetera. So, leaving them out would that'd be a big empty hole at the table in terms of diverse views on artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Now, several weeks before this summit in the UK, China had announced its own global AI governance initiative during the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing. Now, we have the Bletchley Declaration from the AI Safety Summit, and we have the Global AI Governance Initiative framework as released by the Chinese government. How much overlap is there between those two, and what are the most significant points of maybe disagreement?
Yeah, I want to pull out a little bit just for 1 second and note that China's AI Global Governance Initiative isn't the first time China has taken a step towards, facing the international community and making some major statement on AI. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs in February released, some notes on military AI, essentially called the Global Security Concept, right, under Xi's Global Security Initiative. And then China's Ministry of Science and Technology has also formulated AI ethics principles in the past to align with the EU's ethical guidelines for trustworthy AI, or ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI. So China's already done a little bit of this before. Now we get to this new phase of international cooperation on AI, and China's AI Global Governance Initiative and Bletchley, when you stick them together. So let me back up a little bit. Before we get into the differences between those two documents, I think most importantly, we should take the big picture view. Both of them essentially say the same thing, right? Bletchley and the Global AI Governance Initiative are both attempts at a very early stage in AI regulation globally to come to some very basic agreements on AI, right? Let's agree to develop AI responsibly. Let's balance innovation and regulation. Let's make sure we fully understand the risks of AI, right? Because we don't. And both of those documents essentially say the same thing. You have to really look hard to find where the major differences are between the two of them. Some interesting notable points, though. Bletchley leans much more heavily into the concerns around the unknowability of future AI risk, right? And Bletchley also leans more heavily and more clearly into the idea that companies developing AI are particularly responsible for the AI that they develop, right? Those were key points in Bletchley. And China's document, very interestingly, goes very hard on the issue of inclusion, calling in very strong language not to leave countries out of AI governance more globally, right? There's phrases in there like, we oppose drawing ideological lines or forming exclusive groups to obstruct other countries from developing AI. And also, we oppose creating barriers and disrupting the global AI supply chain through technological monopolies and unilateral coercive measures. That's very aggressive language really on inclusion. And of course, that's less reflective of China's position on AI governance than it is reflective of China's concern over US-led semiconductor export controls, right? Because the purpose of those controls was ostensibly to prevent China from training military AI or advancing AI capabilities that threaten, the United States or Western governments. So China went really hard in their initiative into quite a defensive posture. And that defensive posture was intended to kind of rally like-minded countries or countries that feel left out of the technological development curve, feel left out by maybe the G7, right? And so whereas Bletchley was also called for inclusivity, but obviously didn't take a very defensive posture in that regard.
Mm-hmm. But so far, we've been talking about rule setting in the international context, which, as you noted, has this foreign policy dimension of great power competition. That's a separate issue from how China is actually regulating AI at home in terms of domestic regulation. So what can you tell us about China's approach to regulation in the domestic context thus far?
Well, that's a big, long conversation. I'll try to keep it brief, but what I can say is that China was one of the world's first movers on AI regulation. One of the first countries in the world to put out regulation on strong, clear clear is arguable, but strong regulation on recommendation algorithms. They've also, so algorithms that, for example, regulate product recommendations on e-commerce websites and content recommendations on social media, but also, interestingly enough, that recommend scheduling for online ride-hailing or delivery services or this kind of thing. So they really took a broad view on regulating that one particular kind of algorithm, this public-facing algorithm. The other thing that they've regulated is, AI-generated content, AI-generated text, AI-edited video, right? This kind of thing. So any kind of media or text that was created or generated by a machine, China has come out very early with regulations on that. So that'd be like ChatGPT services or any kind of, deep fake video editor tools. If you'll notice, both of those regulations target public-facing services, right? They target consumer-facing services. So social media, news, e-commerce, ride-hailing, ChatGPT, video, these are all consumer-facing services. They haven't released any broad-based all algorithms should, AI law, for example, and they haven't regulated industrial AI processes as much. So the first step into that universe was really on the consumer side, and we expect to see, potentially more regulations coming out on a broader range of AI tools as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. So based on what we've seen in domestic regulations and China's rhetoric and stated goals on the international stage, can we start to envision what a, quote, China model for global AI governance might look like?
Yeah, I don't think it'll be, I think we can a little bit, I don't think it'll be surprising for anybody that follows, Chinese AI policy. China would base an AI governance model on its core concept for cyber sovereignty, right? And cyber sovereignty, if you're not familiar, I'm sure you are, but leans into two ideas, right? One, that each country should have, kind of total authority to govern the use of network technologies or AI within its own borders without any interference from other countries, which is an outgrowth of China's kind of favorite foreign affairs refrain more broadly. In other words, don't moralize at me about what we do here. I won't moralize at you about what you do there, right? But then for those issues where international cooperation is necessary, such as determining the rules for AI and warfare, China has kind of roundly rejected the idea of power blocks and is kind of getting behind this promotion of the idea that each country, kind of no matter how small, should have some say in how those rules are shaped. And again, that's a bit of a defensive posture based on feeling left out. But ultimately, China's stance is to remove ideology from conversations about other countries' domestic affairs. Again, defensive, because China has been targeted with accusations of, mass surveillance and the use of AI, and, mass surveillance in, suppression against the Uyghur population. And so those two narratives have really kind of driven China's stance on on AI more globally. So, to be frank, while I think some of China's domestic AI policies and regulations are very interesting, deserve study from foreign governments, I think that these global and outward-facing initiatives, frankly, were developed as, in a defensive posture rather than in a strong leadership position. And that's how Bletchley and China's approach really differ, right? Bletchley, I think, is notable in the sense that, China does have a point that it is being excluded from a lot of conversations on AI governance, right? And what Bletchley managed to do, I think, very adroitly, was take the wind out of that complaint to a certain extent by dint of inclusion and by dint of focusing on inclusion in its own documentation. I mean, Bletchley was very clear. We don't want, smaller nations to be left behind. We want everybody to have a voice at the table. We want everyone to benefit from AI innovation, right? I think that's something that China has thus far failed to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, still very early days, so of course we'll be keeping an eye on this. Kendra, thank you so much for joining us to talk about China's approach to AI regulation, and thank you at home for watching.